Do you feel nervous when your opponent brings out his queen too early to attack? Well, here I am to help you punish your opponent brutally if he brings out his queen too early in the game. It starts off with e4, we respond with e5, and the second most common move played here is bishop to c4, trying to give an attack on the weak f7 square. Later idea for any beginner player is to play their queen to h5 or queen f3 and give an attack on the f7 square that would result into a scholar's mate. Well, here we are, we'll go with knight to c6. Now, if they play their queen to f3, then what I suggest is you play your queen to f6. Try to exchange the queens off. If he captures, then we are in luck. Also, we are developing with a tempo. Now, this knight, we developed our knight. Also, this knight is giving an attack on the e4 square. If he plays his knight to f3, then he is simply blundering a pawn. But what if he plays his pawn to d3 trying to defend it? So you go ahead with the attack and play your knight to d4. Now knight d4 attacks the c2 square. Here, if your opponent misses this out and just try to develop his well, if he plays his knight to a3 to defend the c2 pawn, then look at this long range sniper. Just capture the knight on the a3 square with your bishop, double up his pawns, and then pick up this pawn, give a nice fork, and you are winning the rook. Okay, what if your opponent is smart enough to see the sniper and he places bishop back on the b3 square? Then we are going to play our pawn to d5. If he captures the pawn on the d5 square, we capture it with the knight. Now, if your opponent thinks that you're blundering a knight, the bishop can simply capture it. But that was just a trick, because now you can capture on the c2 square. That was a deflection. The bishop captured on the d5 square. Now you are capturing on c2, giving a fork, attacking the king as well as the rook. The king has to defend himself, goes on the d2 square, then you can capture the rook. Now the only idea for white here is to capture this knight on the a2 square. Correct? And for that, if he goes and plays his pawn to b3, with the idea is to play bishop b2 and capture this knight. We start off with the attack first. We give attack to the king by playing our bishop to b4. He defended by going his knight to c3. Then we can play our bishop to f5. Now, idea behind bishop f5 is not only to attack this d3 pawn, but to castle and bring your rook on the d8 square. That would be an indirect attack too. What if white plays his bishop to b2 trying to attack this? Then we'll directly go for long castle and attack this bishop. Now notice this knight is pinned. Even though if it is protected by the knight, but the knight is pinned. So he is not protecting it. And when the bishop moves, we will be capturing this d3 pawn. What if your opponent tries to play the bishop to e4? Well, that's a blunder again because that's a free piece. You can simply capture it with your bishop. This pawn is pinned by the rook, which was protecting the bishop, and this knight is pinned by the bishop. So both the pieces are protecting it but are of no use. Okay, what if he doesn't go to e4 but he goes on the c4 square with his bishop? So after bishop c4, what we can do is just play our pawn to c6. The next idea is to play the pawn to b5. c6, if your opponent tries to stop this by playing his pawn to a4, and what if he tries to stop this b5 square with his a4 pawn? It's a big mistake. I want you guys to pause this video, think for the solution and answer down your moves in the comment box. If he doesn't capture your knight on the d5 square, thinking that the bishop is protecting the c2 square and tries to kick your knight away by pushing his pawn to c3, well, that's not a problem either because you now capture the bishop on the b3 square. He captures it back and you are trying to create weaknesses in the white's camp. Here, now you can go with your bishop to f5, trying to attack this hanging pawn on the d3 square. He tries to get rid of it by pushing the pawn up on d4. Then we are happy to exchange and go with the knight to b4. The idea behind knight b4 is simple. Again, attack the c2 square. Not only that, the knight can jump in on d3 and give an attack to these many pieces. So this is completely winning for black. Now let's see if he is not playing his bishop to c4 first. Instead, on the second move itself, he brings out his queen on the h5 square. Now queen h5 gives an attack to the e5 pawn, threatens to capture on the f7 too after bishop c4. So we go normally with knight c6. Now knight c6 defends the e5, so an immediate threat is fulfilled. Now if he plays his bishop to c4 trying to attack our f7 square, do not blunder by playing your knight to f6, otherwise it will be a scholar's mate on the f7 square. Instead, what we do is now kick off this queen by playing your pawn to g6. The queen goes back on the f3 square and then we can do the same thing. play your queen to f6. So next idea is to play the knight to d4, attack the queen as well as the c2 pawn. So he captures your queen and you can capture it back with the knight, doing the same thing again just with this pawn move so that you can later fianchetto this bishop as well. Now when he defends the pawn on the d3 square, you go with your knight to d4, attacking the c2 square. He defends it with bishop to b3, you have to play your pawn to d5. Capture, capture back. After c3, we are doing the same thing again. But this time with just a small difference that your pawn is not on g7, but instead he's on the g6 square. He pushes it forward and you have created so many weaknesses in your opponent's camp. Later you are just trying to play your knight to b4 and it results in the same position. Okay, now let's see. Many of you would not want to exchange your queen too early in the game. So what's the solution? After this move, you play a pawn to g6, the queen goes back, and there's no need to play your queen to f6 if you're not comfortable with exchanging the queen. So what to do next? Just play your knight to f6. Now knight f6 also defends the threat that the queen can no longer capture on the f7 square. Also it gives an attack on the e4 square. The next idea as black is to play your knight to d4. Right, here if white tries to defend this threat and he simply plays his knight to e2, trying to stop this knight from coming on the e4 square. Well, we are not bothered with that. We are going to fianchetto our bishop by just playing it on the g7 square. If here now he plays his pawn to d3, then you go with castle. If he plays his bishop to g5, trying to pin your knight, then we are not worried about it because two of our pieces are already defending it. And just attack this bishop by playing your pawn to h6. The bishop would normally want to go back on the h4 square and you further attack him just by playing your pawn to g5. As soon as the bishop goes back on the g3 square, now is the time that we have not moved our pawn from d7 because we want to do it at the right time. Just play our pawn to d5 now. Now you might think there are 3 attackers over here and only 2 defenders. The knight and the queen are the only 2 defenders. Now one thing, when there are more attackers and less defenders, you are definitely going to lose the piece. When he captures your pawn, you don't need to capture it with your knight, otherwise you are going to lose a free piece because 2 of the pieces are protecting this pawn. So what to do instead? You first go with your bishop to g4, just attack the queen. There's only one safe square for the queen to go, is to go on the e3 square. And we attack him further. What do? We play our knight to d4. Here you are threatening this knight, you are threatening the pawn on the c2 square as well. If your opponent captures, you are capturing it back with your pawn. And now you have opened up this file for your rook to come in, also to give an attack to the king. So when he captures the pawn on the d4 square with his queen, you go rook e1 check. If the king goes on the d2 square, then it's a beautiful discovered attack. Just play your knight to e4, attack the king with your knight, and you are going to win this queen eventually. But what if he knows this, that knight e4 would be a threat, and he goes with his king to f1? Then there comes a beautiful combination. You can play your bishop to e2, give a check, the king obviously goes on the g1 square, and then you can simply play your knight to d7. Now knight d7 is a useful move as it blocks this, gives a discovered attack to the queen. The rook takes control of the complete e file and the queen cannot go to any of these squares. So the queen is trapped and he would have to give away his queen just for your bishop. Now let's see, after the move knight f6, what if he defends the d4 square not by playing his knight to e2 but by pushing his pawn to c3. Still doesn't make a difference. We are going to fianchetto our bishop on the g7 square. Then what if he supports this pawn by pushing his pawn to d3? That is the only good move. You can now castle. If he goes with the bishop to g5, we can give an attack. He goes back. We are further attacking him. Then the bishop goes back on the g3 square. This time we can still push your pawn upon d5. He captures. Go with your bishop to g4. The only choice queen here has is to go on the e3 square. Now there's a slight difference, that there is no knight on e2, but there's a pawn on c3, which protects this d4 square from knight to come in. But that hardly makes a difference because now you have a move like knight to d5. When he captures, you can capture it back, and this queen is again like a sniper attacking this diagonal. Also, if he gives an attack to your bishop, then you can come back with the bishop on the f5 square, attack this d3 pawn and take some advantage there. Or you can just ignore the threat and play a move like pawn f5, thinking that okay, we are doing fine. Even if he captures your bishop on the g4 square, then you can win this rook. Now the only way to stop this capturing of the rook with the queen is to play the queen to f3. But that doesn't stop us from capturing the rook, because now the queen can jump to the other side of the board and get this rook. So this position is completely winning for black. I hope you got these 4 ways of how to brutally punish your opponent if he brings out his queen too early in the game. For more such amazing tricks and traps, stay tuned with us. Till the time, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you.